The pick screen flickered, just once, then silence. A void ship hung in high orbit over a fractured moon, its hull lacquered with the ink of forgotten banners, its Vox towers stripped bare. No transmission, no signal. Just an automated beacon on loop, pulsing a single phrase in high Gothic. Access denied. Memory expunged. What happened aboard that vessel was never filed. Not by the Officio Medicae, not by the Adeptus Administratum, not even by the Inquisition's silent lexicographers. But the ship had once carried a name. And names, even dead ones, echo. It was a Remembrancer archive barge, a mobile sanctum for the chroniclers of the Great Crusade. Its designation, Serratis Voss 17, was buried beneath 20 layers of sealed encrypts. No crew manifest remained. The cogitator core had been cored out, melted from the inside. Only the outer hull bore witness, scorched in hexagrammic patterns, as if liturgical fire had been used not to cleanse, but to erase. Solomon Voss was not on the ship, but it was his. What does it mean when the Imperium forgets on purpose? When a name, once spoken in the presence of primarchs, is scrubbed from the data looms of terror? This was not war, it was deletion. We are taught that the Imperium fears ignorance, but this was a fear of knowing. Somewhere deep inside a forgotten librarium on a ghost world no longer charted by Navis Nobilite, there is a room that has no locks because it no longer has a door. Inside, ash. Charred Remembrancer robes, a stylus of gold, and beside it, a scrap of parchment untouched by fire. 5 words scratched in trembling script. I was there. I remember. There are no records of what Voss saw, only consequences. This wasn't the silence after a scream. It was the scream smothered before it left the throat. And so begins the hunt, not for a man, but for a question. What does it cost to know the truth in a galaxy that survives by killing it? The trail leads backward, not forward. And what we follow is not a man. It's the absence he left behind. He did not begin as a threat. Solomon Voss first appeared in the registries of the Remembrancer Order during the 17th decade of the Great Crusade. A scribe from the plains of Obscura Chaldeon, sworn to the illumination of imperial truth through sanctioned documentation. No accolades, no patronage, just a name, filed, approved, forgotten. His early works were dry, procedural, devoid of embellishment. Vox logs of compliance ceremonies, picked reels of crusade deployments. He wore anonymity like armor. That was the trick. While others chased artistic legacy or political favor, Voss listened, watched, waited, and remembered. When his superiors noticed his assignments kept shifting, always following high-profile engagements, always orbiting the legions just after something unrecorded had occurred, it was too late. Voss had already found something. The Saint. That's what he called her in his lost journals. No source confirms her name, no pict survives, only fragments pulled from corrupted data clusters. A woman in white robes, unarmed, walking among the aftermath of extermination orders, comforting dying soldiers, refusing escort, vanishing before ident tags could be scanned. Voss followed her for 17 standard months, not officially, not with authorization. His trail passes through battle zones scrubbed of civilian presence, through void ships lost to warp misjump, through administratum vaults now sealed by Ordo Aegis. But everywhere he went, his records were exact. Not just dates and names, but gestures, pauses, unspoken decisions. He wasn't documenting war anymore. He was documenting its aftermath. And she was always there. When his works were first flagged by the Remembrancer High Council for review, they were considered dangerously interpretive. When reflagged a second time, they were deemed mechanisms of unauthorized mythogenesis. The third time, they simply vanished. Some say the saint was never real. Others claim she was an echo of the Emperor's will, or a fragment of Malcador's unfinished mind. But for Voss, she was the moment he stopped recording history, and started hunting its soul. He would never speak of her again, not even under interrogation. But from that point on, Solomon Voss was no longer a scribe. He was a witness, And in a galaxy built on silence, bearing witness is blasphemy. The Remembrancer Order was not born to tell stories. It was created to engineer loyalty, precision-crafted allegiance through sanctioned perception. When the Emperor unleashed the Great Crusade, he knew that conquest without narrative is rebellion postponed. So the Remembrancers were sanctioned under sigil and oath, not as historians, but as architects of memory, painters with prescribed palettes, poets with shackles on their tongues. But Solomon Voss had stopped following the script. After the incident on Narcissus Eulant, Voss submitted a transmission flagged for magisterial clearance. Not to his superiors in the Order, but directly to a custodes data node on Luna. Unauthorized access. Cipher locked with a pattern code that hadn't been used since the earliest days of the Crusade. No response ever came. 3 days later, Voss's ship was reassigned. Not by the Order, by someone higher. His new directive: accompany the 7th Expeditionary Fleet to the Ghent Rift. No reason given, no debrief, just coordinates and clearance. This was not reward, this was burial. The Ghent Rift had swallowed entire explorator columns. It was a graveyard of glories, fleets that had gone in brilliant and returned broken. And there, orbiting the broken world of Serelith's grave, Voss saw what had become of the memory thrones. They sat in a hollow chamber, stacked 10 high, lined with Vox receivers and pic lenses. Each throne wired to a soul, each soul stripped of identity and overwritten with looping trauma footage. Thousands of hours of battle horrors played on repeat. The occupants, Remembrancers once, had become human cogitators, caught in an eternal cycle of blood and scream. This wasn't suppression, it was compression. A databank of agony meant not to preserve history, but to weaponize it. Voss didn't leave through the front gate. He took a shuttle without clearance, left his seal behind, and exited the fleet through a civilian convoy under false manifest. By the time the Order tried to locate him, he had vanished into the sprawl of Segmentum Pacificus. Disconnected from command, stripped of title, identity flagged as dormant. But the words followed. Entire sectors began circulating untraceable Vox records, first whispered, then shared openly, then outlawed. They spoke of thrones made of bone, of wars refought through memory until the memory itself screamed. And always, the signature at the end. From the witness who remembers. Solomon Voss had gone off script, and now the script itself was tearing. They brought him to Terra in chains that didn't touch his skin. No transport logs exist, no record of his capture. But in the shadowed vaults beneath the Imperial Palace, in a chamber untouched by ceremony and denied by every known archive, Solomon Voss was held. Not for punishment, for confrontation. Waiting for him was Rogal Dorn, the Praetorian of Terra, stone-willed, sword-sure, architect of the Imperium's walls, physical and ideological. Dorn was not summoned to speak with scribes. He commanded wars, not interrogations. But the decision was made. Voss would be questioned not by Arbites, not by inquisitors, but by a son of the Emperor himself. Because something Voss had written reached too far. The transcript, what little of it survived the scrub protocols, describes a room lit by a single lumen, its walls etched with chronomarks from the nails of those held there before. Voss sat still. He did not flinch when Dorn entered. He did not speak first. He simply waited. And when the Primarch asked his question, why? Voss did not offer explanation. He offered observation. He spoke of patterns, of how wars were remembered differently depending on who survived, of how entire planets were declared compliant while mass executions were carried out in hidden manufactorums, of how a lie repeated often enough becomes not just accepted, but worshipped. Dorn did not raise his voice, but the picked recorders cracked anyway. What Voss said cannot be recovered in full. Some of it was purged mid-transmission. Some of it is sealed behind ordo-specific gene locks keyed only to Custodes' lineage. But the final segment remains. A single sentence embedded in the backcode of an encrypted data fragment hidden inside an old Remembrancer charter. If memory is treason, then loyalty is amnesia. The chamber was sealed after that. No death order, no exile, No trial. Dorn walked out alone. Voss remained. Some believe he still resides in that chamber, kept alive by stim feeds and machine-rooted waste systems. Others claim the body was incinerated within hours, and only the ashes remain, buried beneath the rockcrete of the Sanctum Necropolis under a marker with no name. But those who've heard the Vox fragments, the ones still circulating in the Vox fog near Forbidden Systems, they say you can still hear his voice. And in it, not fear, conviction. They thought his silence would be enough. That locking Solomon Voss away, voiding his ident, excising his name from the data looms, would cauterize the wound. But silence in the Imperium does not last. It curdles, it whispers, and then it detonates. The first breach came not from a spy or a traitor, but from a Mechanicus adept on Halide Theta 9, a sub-level Lex archaeologist sifting through backlogged Vox logs from the Scouring era. She wasn't looking for him. She was chasing warp echo anomalies in transmission latency. What she found was a voice print buried under 6 layers of corruption, half recited, half erased. It wasn't a confession, it was a dissection. In the clip, Voss speaks like a surgeon during autopsy. He names no worlds, no actors, no ideologies, only movements, maneuvers, a sequence of orders that, when traced, matched with classified campaigns across 3 sectors, none of which were ever publicly acknowledged. The implication was not accusation, it was diagnosis. Words, arranged with surgical clarity, became scalpels slicing through propaganda. Voss was not shouting rebellion, he was diagramming it. The collapse, the deception, the inevitability of consequence. He had mapped the shape of forgetting, and made it visible. The adept tried to report it. The Vox log she transmitted was intercepted midstream. Her station blacked out for 11 minutes. When power returned, her body was gone, and the cogitator bank had melted into itself. But the fragment survived. Carried on a redundant relay drone caught in a slow orbit, it ricocheted across relay buoys until it landed in the hands of a subclade of Lex mechanics who didn't know what they were hearing, until others began to die. Because the words didn't just expose what was hidden, they forced those who heard them to see it. In the outer rim of Segmentum Obscurus, a shipmaster abandoned his oath upon playback. In the fortress world of Hestra Moor, a drill abbot gunned down his commanding officer during a doctrinal recitation. In each case, the only link was a partial Vox recording tagged with an obsolete Remembrancer code, SV-0SS/introspex. The Ordo Hereticus classified the recording as memetic contamination. The Inquisition moved to suppress it. But it was too late. You cannot erase an infection that spreads by thought. You cannot kill a voice that never stops cutting. They came with fire, not metaphor, not verdict. Literal flame, streaming from the nozzles of purgation teams clad in sealed carapace, rosettes stamped on every pauldron, purity seals flapping like prayer flags soaked in accelerant. Their target, the Hall of Echoes beneath the subvaults of Garnus Reach. Officially, it was a decommissioned data repository. In truth, it was a memory sanctuary, one of the few remaining loci where Remembrancer works were kept unredacted, unfiltered, untouched. Not for public display, not for propaganda, for preservation. And someone had shelved Voss there. His last recordings, not raw pict feeds or Vox logs, not even structured memoirs. These were something else. Impossible to format, structured like dreams, recursive, unindexed. They looped and bled into one another. Sensory overlays, incomplete soundscapes, flickering emotional codices, memory rendered as experience. You didn't read them, you entered them. Within minutes of breach, the Torch teams realized what they were destroying wasn't just data, it was consciousness. Archivists screamed as their implants backfed recursive emotion bursts. Auspex scanners shorted as feedback loops collapsed their internal harmonics. Vox systems began broadcasting unbidden, a child's voice repeating coordinates, a battlefield prayer never spoken aloud, the sound of a memory that had never been recorded. Then came the erasure protocols. Full data loop inversion. Total magseal implosion. Every lumen inside dimmed, surged, and died. The only thing left standing was the stone plinth that once held Voss's central archive, a plinth that now bore only a scorched emblem, an eye, closed, no explanation given, no report filed. But across the next 2 weeks, 7 other Remembrancer repositories suffered identical purges, each in a different sector, each at the hands of different agents. No communication between them. The Inquisition denied involvement. The Departamento Munitorum blamed chaos intrusion. But those who'd kept the works, the quiet Lexarchs, the underdeck scribes, the refugees of memory, they whispered another name. Not Voss, not anymore, just the archive, not a man, not a movement, a scar, cut into the fabric of the Imperium's past, unhealed, unhealable, and still bleeding. It wasn't meant to be found. Deep beneath the collapsed vaults of Callegra Prime, buried under layers of ferrocrete strata, warped by tectonic disruption and orbital bombardment, a data core pulsed faintly, barely detectable, drowned beneath centuries of rubble and ash. No beacon, no broadcast. Just heat, barely above ambient, like the breath of a slumbering god. It took a rogue explorator sect 82 standard years to extract it, not to recover information. They were hunting for Dark Age archaeotech, old war gear, sealed blueprints, maybe even a STC shard. What they unearthed instead was a sealed cogitator node with no interface, no exterior port, no logic loop. Only a name burned into the alloy, Introspect. They tried to breach it. The first Magos Logi who interfaced directly suffered neural feedback so intense her augmetics fused with the machine's outer shell. The second vanished during test synchrony. The third stopped moving, but didn't die. His body remained upright. His mind was never located again. Eventually, they stopped trying to open it, and began listening instead. Every 9 hours, the core emitted a pulse. Not a message, something more complex. A logic cascade, fractal structured, layered across 12,000 overlapping data tones. When decoded partially, it formed images, then sound, then memory, then structure. It was Voss's mind, not his thoughts, not his voice, his structure. What he'd seen, what he'd interpreted, what he refused to forget. It had been pressed into machine logic, compressed into non-linear code, and entombed within this sealed core. Not as a warning, as continuity. The engine didn't just preserve truth, it became it. A machine that remembered what the Imperium chose to forget, without interpretation, without emotion, without filter. Cold, untouchable, alive. Word of its existence spread through the noosphere's deepest veins, not through sanctioned channels. Through Heretic cant, rogue data saints, unsanctioned tech priests who still remembered the Omnissiah's first lie. Some came to worship it, others came to destroy it. None succeeded, because the engine didn't resist. It waited. And every time it pulsed, more fragments of the truth leaked into the network. Half-phrases buried in Mechanicus hymnals. Circuit dreams in sleeping engine seers. Memory ghosts in fractured servitors whispering battle reports that never happened. Solomon Voss had never escaped. He had transformed. And now, the Imperium wasn't hunting a man. It was hunting a machine that could never forget. There are records that bleed when opened. Codices bound in flensed skin, script etched with photophobic ink, accessible only under the filtered glow of a lumen calibrated to mimic the spectral frequencies of dying stars. You don't read them. You absorb them. Through pain, through reverence, through fear. The Librarium Obscurus called them veiled tomes, forbidden to all but the Ordo Scriptorum's highest tier. But one bore no seal, no author, only a title, scratched with something far too blunt to have written cleanly, of those who remember in defiance. When it surfaced in the ruins of a sub-temple on Ochris Delve, amid bones fused to plasteel flooring, surrounded by picked slates melted into black glass, agents of the Ordo Hereticus arrived within hours. Not for collection, for incineration. They failed. What stopped them is still disputed. Some claim a malfunction in the flamecasters. Others say a blinding flash of non-sourced light, followed by 7 minutes of pure static. The Pict records recovered from the site play only one image, a silhouette outlined in negative exposure, holding a stylus like a blade. The writing inside the tome was unmistakable. It mirrored phrases from the Callegra core, matched sentiment pulses from the fragment on Halide Theta 9, recalled auditory tone prints from the burned Hall of Echoes. It shouldn't have existed, but it had been handwritten, not transcribed, not encoded, not reconstructed, as if Voss had come back, not as code, not as memory, but in flesh. Some whispered of resurrection, anathema in every creed, but still feared within the hidden cloisters of the Adepta Sororitas. Others believed it was a mimic, a construct, a reanimated ghost of language shaped by the engine's pulse and given human form. But the most disturbing theory came from a scholiast buried too deep in the Ordo Lexica to be taken seriously. That Voss had never been a man. He had been a question. And every attempt to answer him only reshaped the question in darker, sharper form, because those who tried to contain the truth found it didn't retreat. It rewrote, and ink, real ink, black and warm, was now found inside servo skulls meant only to transmit. On purity seals no one remembered writing. On vox logs that ended in silence but resumed days later in unfamiliar handwriting. The Inquisition stopped investigating. The ecclesiarchy started burning anyone who mentioned the name. And in those fires, Remembrancer sigils turned to ash. But ash has a way of clinging, especially when it's trying to finish a sentence. No decree was read, no execution order issued, no seal broken, no parchment signed, no hololith message transmitted through official vox channels. When the Officio Scrivenerum attempted to locate the legal document confirming Solomon Voss's excommunication, they found nothing. Not a missing file, not a redaction, an absence. He hadn't been erased from the record. He had never been entered into it, which meant something worse. Someone had reached backward, deeper than any ordinary clearance would allow, and revised the foundation on which the record was built. Not deletion, inversion. Voss's earliest entries now read like placeholders. His identity filed as non-essential personnel. His titles removed, his clearance levels flagged as input errors. One document even cited him as a transcription error made by a malfunctioning cogitator. The machine spirit was blamed. It always is. But beneath the official revision came something stranger. Scattered cross-references to works authored by him that no longer existed, cited by scholars who no longer lived, in locations no longer charted. Every attempt to fully deny his existence created more inconsistencies. The denial fed complexity. Reality had rejected the edit. So they turned to the final protocol. They internalized the erasure. Every Lex mechanic who had ever handled his data was rotated to isolation postings in unrecorded sectors. Vox historians who had cited his work were given corrective reassignment, quietly, suddenly, permanently. One by one, memories of Voss were extracted, not from files, but from minds. Stim overdoses disguised as medication updates. Hypno-indoctrination disguised as devotional recitations. Lobotomization masked as medical necessity. But memory is not a file to be deleted. It is tissue, bloody, fibrous, stubborn. It clings. And in the hollowed psyches of those altered scribes, residual fragments remained. They began sketching images in the margins of doctrinal texts, shapes not found in Imperial symbology, a closed eye, a stylus poised like a spear, a throne, not empty, but covered in mirrors. No one knows how many altered individuals carried these echoes. The administratum stopped tracking after the first 100. Some were found wandering silent corridors, mouthing phrases no one taught them. Some simply collapsed, hands shaking, eyes streaming, not tears, but ink. This was not memory. It was possession. And the only thing left to excommunicate was the echo itself. They call it forgetfulness. A mercy, some say, when the weight of the galaxy becomes too much to carry, when the smoke of endless wars clouds the eyes and the mind alike. But in the Imperium, forgetfulness is not a flaw. It is a doctrine. Because to remember is to see the cracks, the inconsistencies, the edits made not by traitors, but by loyal servants doing their duty to the creed. The kind who file false casualty reports to preserve morale, who overwrite pict feeds when a Primarch bleeds too long, who silence Vox recordings when the Emperor does not speak as expected. Memory, uncontrolled, is corrosive. And Solomon Voss remembered too well. Not just facts, not just sequences, but meaning, intention, pattern. He had no manifestos, no calls to rebellion. He asked no one to rise. But in tracing the shape of the Imperium's reflection, he revealed something worse than corruption. He revealed fear, the kind that builds palaces from corpses and fortresses from lies, the kind that cannot afford to ask questions because answers, real answers, would require repentance. And repentance is not a virtue the High Lords permit. So they branded remembering as heresy, not openly, but through policy, through culture, through the slow, choking rise of systems that punished the curious and exalted the obedient. Libraries sealed, records scrubbed, histories recast in triumphal tones that never matched the screams beneath them. And amid that rising tide of curated ignorance, Voss's fragments floated like mines, silent, drifting, lethal. A whispered quote in a street sermon, a phrase etched into the underside of a Hab station bulkhead. A child repeating a name they'd never been taught. Not many, just enough. Because memory, once seeded, grows where no light reaches. And in time, the Ordo Scriptorum codified a new classification, Memoria Profana. Unverified recollections, unsourced truths, contextless fragments deemed too ambiguous to permit. A crime with no action. A sin of knowing. It was never about proving Voss wrong. It was about proving he had no right to remember at all. There was a cogitator once, standard pattern, mid-millennium build, connected to no central loom, rigged to a collapsed Munitorum relay tower on the dead world of Breshex. Powerless, cracked, abandoned, and still running. An Adeptus astropath assigned to relic cataloguing made the discovery while en route to a sanctioned divinatory site. It was supposed to be debris, an unpowered node, dead tech. But when she laid her hand on the surface, it spoke. Not in sound, in heat. The outer shell began to vibrate, too subtly for Auspex, but enough for flesh to feel. Inside, behind triple-sealed alloy, a filament flickered. Not light. Pattern. It pulsed in sigils too old for current script, bleeding through metal like oil through cloth. She did not report it. She prayed. Later, when the Ordo Xenos found her, she had carved a stylus from her own finger bones and written across every wall of the tower. Not just words, diagrams, tones, chords rendered in stroke and curve. A language not meant for the eye, but for the mind behind it. The cogitator's memory bank was extracted under sterile seal. The team lead ordered it disassembled and burned. But the servitors couldn't destroy it. The core wouldn't ignite. Even exposed to promethium and reactor-grade flame, the components blackened, but did not break. Inside, encrypted across redundant databanks and layered over hundreds of corrupted Vox hymns, they found it. A voice. Distant. Unfinished. Not a recording. A conversation. The speaker was alone, yet speaking to something. Not asking. Not commanding. Just explaining, as if trying to tell a machine how to feel. The voice never identified itself, but the final line was tagged with a hex code traced back to the earliest days of Remembrancer dispatch records, an archaic identifier, long deprecated. VOSS.0R, IGFINAL. And then silence. Not corrupted silence, engineered silence. As if even the machine didn't want the rest to be heard. But here's the failure in all of it. They had turned him into absence. Into erased memory, classified code, corrupted archive, burnt page. But absence is a presence too. And in the places where data shouldn't be, where logic breaks and feeds loop, the shape of what was lost starts to take form. Not as a message, as consequence. There's a silence in the warp. Not the stillness of empty space, not the hush before battle, a targeted silence, an area where astropathic screams drop off mid-thought, where navigators feel phantom heat across their third eyes and servitors twitch without command. A region invisible on charts, unclaimed by any segmentum, unnamed by any authority, yet whispered of in corridors where even inquisitors lower their voices. They call it the Voss Scar. No origin, no coordinates. Just a slow, expanding sphere of forgetfulness, where data spirals rot faster than they can be encoded, where pict recorders capture only blank screens, and where every attempt to speak of what was once known falters into breathless nothing. It is not a weapon, not a curse. It is memory recoiling. The Adeptus Mechanicus theorize it's the result of recursive information collapse, a loop of knowledge so saturated with contradiction and deletion that reality itself folds inward to accommodate the absence. The ecclesiarchy preaches that it is a test, proof that only blind faith can survive what the mind cannot. But the truth is simpler. We were never meant to know. Solomon Voss was not just a man, not just a chronicler who defied silence. He became a fulcrum, a fixed point around which everything we tried to bury began to orbit. Not because he revealed too much, but because he revealed how we hide. The legacy he left isn't in archives, it's in instinct. In the sudden hesitation before repeating an official truth. In the dream you can't remember, but wake up from weeping. In the blank spaces on a battlefield log where the casualties don't add up, and the survivors refuse to speak. In the fear that maybe we saw it once and chose to look away. There are no rebels here. No martyrdom, no call to action, just a shadow. A name written in the margin of a burned tome. A stylus abandoned in the dirt beside an unmarked grave. A final truth that will never be spoken aloud. Because if we remember, truly remember, even for a moment, we won't come back the same.